Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Ricardo. I'm a real estate investor from Portugal. I've been investing in Portugal since 2017, and today I want to talk with you about what is required and what you should expect in terms of purchasing a property in Portugal. In this video, I'm going to tell you what documents I always request in order to analyze a property before purchasing one, and also all the documents that are necessary in order to legally buy a property in Portugal. And before we start, I just want to give you a disclaimer, which is all this analysis and this information that I'm going to share with you is applicable to properties that are destined to households. So this means villas, apartments, apartment buildings. So these are the most common types of properties that are usually used as households for someone to live. So in the next minutes, I'm going to share with you which documents you need to analyze and what is the purpose of each of these documents of a single property. What taxes are you going to pay when you purchase a property? What procedures should you take before buying one? And which services you must pay in order to make official the purchase of property. So first, let's start with the documents. The documents that you need to analyze and gather before purchasing a property are the Certidão Permanente, which is the document of registration of a property, the CPU, the Caderneta Predial Urbana, which is a document provided by the IRS, the Destination License or Licença de Habitação, the energy certificate or certificado energético, and the technical sheet, which is in Portuguese the Ficha Técnica de Utilização. And depending on the age of the property and if it even has or it doesn't have the plans, so the property plans where it states the areas, the layout of the property, where the bathroom is located, the kitchen is located, etc. These might also be necessary depending on the age of the property. Very old properties usually don't have the plans. Newer properties, they usually have the plans which were previously accepted by the city chamber in order to approve the project which led to the building of these properties. So the first one and the most important is the Certidão Permanente or Certidão do Registro Predial, which translated is like the identification, the most important identification document of a property, is the registry document of this property. In this document, you'll be able to see and to view all the history from that property. You will be able to see who built it. You will see who was the first person to buy it. You will see who was the second, the third, the fourth, and so on. You will also see any mortgage that was contracted on the purchase of, on any of these purchases of this property. Let's say the first or the second person, it doesn't matter, he or she bought it with a mortgage. So in this document, you will see when the person bought this property, at the same time of that registry, there was also a registration of a mortgage, and you will be able to see of how much was this mortgage and what was the collateral amount of it. So essentially this document is like the identification document of a property. You'll be able to see previous owners. You will see if there is any legal problems with the property. For instance, the seller is selling you a property which has a pawn or a garnishment on the property. Let's say they stopped paying to the bank, so the bank ordered a process with the court. So now the property has a pawn or a garnishment. So it might indicate problems and you might have to solve them. I strongly advise you to solve them before buying the property, because it will be possible to buy a property with a garnishment or pawn on it. This document will also have, of course, the description of the property and the areas of the property. The second document, CPU, Caderneta Predial Urbana, which is a document issued by the IRS or the financial department of the government. And this document also has an identification of the property. It will have a description of it. Let's say it's a two-story duplex property, so it has one apartment in the ground floor and one apartment on the first floor. It will have that described. It will also have the areas, so it will have the gross areas, the land areas, if there is a land attached to the property, and the private area of the property. In this very same document, you will also see an evaluation of the property from the IRS. So, and usually this value is completely detached from a market value, so you can have a property which you are buying for $200,000, and it has the name of this evaluation from the IRS is called the VPT, the Valor Patrimonial Tributário, and this value can be like $25,000. So you are buying a property for $200,000, and the IRS evaluation is on $25,000. Why is this important? Because every year in Portugal you pay property taxes, and the percentage of this tax is different between municipalities of each district in Portugal. So this tax, this net value that you're going to pay as property tax every year, which is the tax name is IMI, so IMI in Portuguese, Imposto Municipal sobre Imóveis, or municipal tax over properties, if I'm translating right. And the property tax that you are going to pay every year is calculated based on this VPT, this Valor Patrimonial Tributário. So if you're buying a $200,000 property, but its IRS evaluation is only $25,000, and the city tax for the city where the property is located is, let's say, 0.5% of the VPT, then your property tax every year that you're going to pay is going to be, and I'm going to make the calculations now, 0.5% times $25,000, which is 125 euros a year in property taxes. A third document is the usage license, or in Portuguese, licença de utilização. For households or properties that are destined for people to live, it will be a license issued for housing. And this document is very important because there are some properties that were built before, and they are clearly for housing purposes, or for family to live, or multiple families to live. But for some reason in the past, the builder or the owner didn't request the city chamber to issue this usage license, in this case for housing, so a housing license. And why is this important? Because if you are going to make a mortgage or have a mortgage, or you intend to have a mortgage on this purchase, the bank will require you to have this housing license of the property. And although the property is clearly for housing, like a duplex or an apartment, if it doesn't have this license, then you won't be able to buy it. Or at least you won't be able to buy it with the bank mortgage. So this is very important because although the house is very nice, it might even be completely refurbished, completely new, but if it doesn't have this license, it will most likely impact its market value. So pay attention, and especially if you plan to have a mortgage or to buy the house with a mortgage, make sure it has this document issued. Otherwise, you might incur in financing problems and you might be wasting money on the financing process that won't even be able to move forward. The fourth document is the energy certificate. So this is a certificate that once issued, it has an expiration deadline of 10 years, and it is mandatory for a property to be listed on the marketplace and mandatory for a property to be transacted, especially if it is a property destined to housing. This certificate basically categorizes your property or the property that you are going to purchase in terms of energy efficiency. So if you have double glazed windows or if you have newly insulated walls, it will upgrade his or this property energy certificate graduation or classification, I mean. And if for some reason you have to pay for this certificate in the future, let's say when it expires, currently at today's time, the average cost of such certificate for like a 1-bedroom apartment or 2-bedroom apartment is around 150 to 300 euros, depending on the size of the apartment, of course. And if it's a larger apartment, it will be a bit more expensive. But just to give you an idea of how much this certificate costs, so no smart boy or girl will trick you in buying a property saying this costs more than it actually does. Another document which is necessary, it's the usage technical sheet, or in Portuguese, ficha técnica de utilização. And this is a document that is only going to be required in properties, or if you're buying a property that was built after 2004. So if you're buying a property, let's say from the 90s, this document will not be requested. This document will not even exist because it was not required to issue upon the construction before 2004. Okay. Last but not least, the plans of the property. So the plans which state the layout, not only the plans from the apartment itself, but also from the whole building. It will be requested. There are some properties that do not have plans. Usually older properties or properties before 1961, they don't have plans. So usually either you don't submit any plans with the purchase or with any mortgage process, or you just request a technical person to make these plans. So next chapter of this video are the taxes that you are going to pay on when you are buying a property in Portugal. And there are mainly two taxes that you are going to pay. One of them is IS, or Imposto do Selo, or Stamp Duty Tax, and the other is IMT, I will say it in Portuguese, Imposto Municipal sobre Transações Onerosas. Imposto do Selo, or the IS, or Duty Stamp Tax in English, it's a fixed percentage and it's 0.8% of the highest value between the purchase price, and remember the VPT that I mentioned previously in this video. It will be calculated or applied to the biggest of these values. So if the VPT is, like the example I said before, it's $25,000 and the purchase price is $200,000, then the IS, the Imposto do Selo, of 0.8%, and this is a flat tax. It applies 0.8%. Either it's €1 property or 200 million property, 200 million euros property. It will be always flat, and it will apply on the biggest or the largest value between the VPT and the purchase price. So in the previous example, the purchase price is clearly higher than the VPT. It is $200,000 versus $25,000 of the VPT. So the 0.8% will be calculated on the 200,000. And the same happens with IMT. IMT will be applied also to the highest value between the VPT and the purchase price. But IMT is a progressive tax. So what it means is that there are several brackets of this tax between 0 and 8%, and it's a progressive tax. So if your property, the more expensive it gets, the higher this higher value will be taxed. And so that there are no confusion on your side, I will leave below a simulator where you'll be able to type the value of a property that you might be interested in purchasing in Portugal, and it will just calculate the IMT that you are going to have to pay, the IMT tax, and also the IS, the Imposto do Selo tax, which is the 0.8% times the maximum value between the VPT and the purchase price. And now that our taxes are paid, let's move forward with procedures that you want to make or you must make in order to buy a property in Portugal. So one of them, and this is a relatively recent request or requirement for buying a property, is that if you are buying an apartment in an apartment complex which has a condominium established, so there is a condominium formed for all the apartments in this apartment complex, what you are going to need is a proof issued by this condominium, which usually is like a minute, like some document written by the condominium stating that the property that you are purchasing has no debt to the condominium. So these condominiums usually have like a monthly fee or a yearly fee or semestral fee, whatever, where everybody pays an amount, and this amount then goes to pay like building insurance, any repairs on the common areas like the roof, like the stairs, the front doors, etc. So you are going to want to request for this document which states that this specific apartment does not have any debt to the condominium, so everything is paid off. Otherwise, you might find out that the previous owner or the current owner has debt to the condominium, or second, you might, let's say it's someone that has to sell the property really quick and they have some debts with the condominium. With these minutes, you might, during the registration of the purchase, you might be able to assume the previous owner's debt. So let's say they own €1,000 because they didn't pay some roof repairs. You don't have to wait for them to pay the roof repairs. You can just buy the property as is. You inherit this debt to the condominium and then you pay it. But it's actually mandatory that you have this document so that when you're buying the property, there are no debts left behind. So the main goal of this new law that made mandatory to request these minutes from the condominium was that previously, like, owners would just sell the property. They didn't pay any condominium fees or any common areas maintenance in the past. And what would happen is that the new owner would buy the property. Usually they would buy the property without any burdens on it, and essentially the condominium would be harmed because the previous debt would simply disappear. So now that doesn't happen. When you are buying the property in an apartment complex where there is a condominium established, so I have to state this. If you are buying like a duplex, which is a whole property, then you don't have this condominium, of course. But if you're buying an apartment, now there is no way that you buy an apartment and that previous debts are forgiven or they just disappear like it happened in the past. So when you're buying the property, you either check that there are no debts from the current owner, or you can choose, if they don't want to pay these debts, you can choose to inherit the debt and then pay it yourself. The second procedure, which is mandatory, is that you give in Portuguese we call it the direito de preferência, which translated is the right of preference. This procedure is essentially based on this. You go to this portal, which is Casa Pronta, casapronta.pt. I will also leave the link down below. And you will essentially announce a transaction. Okay, usually the seller is the one who does this procedure, but you want to make sure that they actually do this procedure. Otherwise, if they don't have availability or whatever, you can be the one doing this procedure. It costs €15, and what you have to do is going to the site casapronta.pt. You have to give details about the deal, so who's selling, who's buying, which is the amount. And then when you publish this announcement, which you have to pay, you or the seller has to pay €15, then there is a time frame of 10 days where multiple entities like city municipalities, national organizations, where they can exert their right of preference. So let's say the municipality goes every week checking this website and they see that there is a transaction with the property that you plan to buy, and they noticed it and they remembered for some reason that they are going to need this property. They can exert, or they can claim their right of preference and essentially replace you on the deal, and they buy the property instead for the value that you negotiated with the seller, etc., etc. So in most parts of Portugal, nobody is going to claim this right of preference. Usually, like more on historical centers or near public organization buildings, there might claim this right of preference, but usually, at least from my experience, they don't, if it's just like a regular apartment or something like that. But it's something that is mandatory to publish this announcement of the sale in this portal. You have to print the proof that you paid for this announcement, these €15, with the identification of the sellers and you as the future buyer. And then they have 10 full days and when I say them, is all these organizations and the city chamber, etc. They have 10 days to pronounce themselves. If nobody pronounces themselves in this deadline of 10 days, then it's assumed that nobody wanted to claim their right of preference in this deal, and you're safe to go. Nobody is going to replace you on this deal that you might even already done in the past. Okay. And now that you know all the documents that you are going to need to buy a property, and you know how much in taxes you are expected to pay, the IS, the IMT, which again I mentioned, I'll have the links down below so you can simulate all these taxes. There are more things you have to pay. One of them is the registration of the Purchase and Selling Act. So the property owner is selling the property to you. This act has to be registered, and you will have to pay the registration on the public services, and also a service from a lawyer or a notary or a solicitor. And usually the cost of the lawyer services plus this registration usually is about 400 to 700 or 800 euros, depending on where you make these or where you celebrate this purchase and selling agreement. But usually these are the prices. So from 400, which I think is the cheapest I've ever paid, is around 400 or 450. Usually what I pay is between 500 and 600 euros, but I've paid more before in other lawyers that might charge a bit more than what I'm used to, like 700 euros for the services from that lawyer or solicitor or whatever, plus the registration of the purchase and selling contract. And the second thing you might need to pay, and this only happens if you are going to have a mortgage on the property, is also the registration of the mortgage on the property. So if you are just buying the property without any mortgage, you pay the lawyer services and the purchase and selling contract registration. But if you are having a mortgage, you will also have to pay a new registration of the mortgage, only of the Mortgage Act, and also the services of the lawyer or solicitor of celebrating these acts. And before we end this video, and speaking about having a mortgage, there is also an additional tax if you have a mortgage of 0.6% of the landed value from the bank. So let's say you are buying a property for $200,000 and you are buying it with an LTV of 80%, so you will have a $160,000 mortgage. You will have to pay 0.6% off on the 160,000 euros. I think I said dollars, but it's euros in Portugal, that you're going to have to pay on the mortgage amount, okay? Usually it's 0.6% on the mortgage amount. If the loan deadline is more than 5 years, if it's less than 5 years, then the tax is 0.5%. So there's a difference of 0.1%, depending if your mortgage will last, or your mortgage payments will last for 20 years or more than 5 years, actually, or less than these 5 years. So this is what you should expect when buying a property in Portugal in terms of procedures, documents that are necessary, and taxes to pay. Again, I make this disclaimer. I made this video intentionally for housing properties. If you are buying, let's say, a shop or a warehouse or land or just land, then these rules and these requirements might change. So if that's your case, I invite you to comment down below what doubts you might have if you are maybe buying a land or buying a shop or buying a warehouse, so that I can help you out in the comments for these specific scenarios, okay? I hope you enjoyed the video. I also invite you to visit my Portuguese channel, which is, I will leave the link also down below. Follow me on Instagram if you want to get in touch with me. If you need help in anything related to real estate investing in Portugal, feel free to reach me on Instagram. Check my videos on my Portuguese channel, where I share all my previous investments that I've made since the last 3 to 4 years. I've been documenting everything on social media. If you have any friend that is also looking to Portugal as an option to invest or even to buy a property to live, a house to live, then share this video with them. I really appreciate a lot if you do that. I hope to see you in the next video, and until then, take care.